Hi, welcome to episode 2 of my podcast. My name is Brian Moeller. This is going to be the reading of chapter 1 of The Witcher, Hexer. Chapter 1, Rivia. An unwelcome stranger came lone on a horse, sitting tall and straight upon his extravagant saddle, riding unseen before he shockingly appeared before the boy's father, who most certainly was the man of the house. This hateful, uninvited sojourner was not exactly a sojourner. This phantom of a man came to this small and humble home with the darkest of presents, which was previously undisturbed from daily peace before that nightmarishly evil day when their God hid the presence of the face of love from them. "I've come for your son." The man on the horse stopped as the father walked out of the doorway of his home, stopping the father in his tracks, as if the horse itself sensed the perfectly timed meeting. "Wrong address." The father stood in the courage and good faith according to his character. This cottage was in a peaceful place within a lovely town called Rivia, protected by the dense countryside surrounding its borders. No one would know how to find this place unless they knew of the town personally. Simply being informed would not be enough to find the town of Rivia unless you had a familiar guide. This courageous father, standing his ground, was not moved, as he stood like the rock he was, and the foundation of the home, providing meat for the house his ever-working hands built. These hands of his father could not win this day against this fight that came to his door, because he was outnumbered by the trickery of the Dark Ones, who came for what they declared as theirs. Immediately the elder, battle-scarred man on the horse gave his declaration of demands. "These 7 years have passed. We did not forget what you swore to render to us. Now this day, as I've come to your home, you're unexpectedly caught by surprise? Your newborn son was the deal you made." The father impulsively spoke with disregard. "You crazy tramp." No other words were spoken that day, as the destruction swept over the town. With anger and fury, the ways of evil were given dominion and power to utterly destroy, laying waste to this home and all surrounding life, along with the inhabitants' shelter. The livestock was abused and eradicated in a filthy feast. The Count's riders swept through Rivia like a burning plague as they descended upon the village. Their torches struck fear in their victims as the knights ignited the town that the builders knew to be unburnable fireproof material. This was not the fire they knew. In these times, fire was not as we know it today. There were milder ways to cook and to give light and energy. The fire these sorcerers brought to the power of evil the Count wielded burned in such a way that the slain were convinced before death that they were entering the gates of hell. Rubble of their stone foundations were no longer recognizable buildings, so this devastation of their town would have been too much for any hypothetical hidden survivors to lay eyes upon. Small fires burned that the evil riders left behind in their gluttonous feasts abandoned. The grief would be for the boy alone to experience, along with many other boys who were chosen for the ritual of mutation. The ones administering the procedure were twisted in morality. The fight against countless centuries warring with endless monstrous beasts had warped the minds of these Hexers, and so in these times the Witchers took in all they could to build up their battalion. In theory, it was a good righteous plan to kill true evil with a lesser evil. But was it really a lesser evil? The boy was taken to an ancient altar made of stone to be strapped down with leather belts around his wrists that were tightened with barely enough room to let blood flow or circulate in his hands. He struggled to break free, but could not because of the sedatives they had tricked him with along the way. The poor boy was hungry and ever so thirsty. He could not say the words he wanted to say because of the kind of poisons they had given this boy. In his mind he pleaded with them to let him go, because he knew what they were doing was not right. He knew what they were doing was evil, because he knew that boys or even young men should not be taken for such things. What the Hexers were doing was reserved for men. He knew it, and yet the boy could do nothing but moan and groan under his defeated expression. He sank into the altar as his muscles relaxed, knowing full well that the pain of torture was coming. His ears perked up to listen to the words of the sadistic Hexers during the initiation of his new life, which would never die so easy as he understood life to be. Without the proper selection and mutation, we won't get a good Hexer, one of the warriors spoke to an elder, with others to also hear. Is he a Hexer? The long-haired aged one with long white beard spoke, to be answered before he could finish sounding out the word Hexer. Yes, another warrior witcher answered. A man too? The other asked in quick response to the first answer. Yes. The first also quickly replied with a satisfactory result. The shaven bald elder intervened. Enough. He'll fight and kill monsters that threaten people. The boy grew confused as to what happened when he was taken. He was oblivious to the powers of the Count, who could change appearance as he wilt. Grown, the older boy visited his home in later years to see the ruins of every memory he had in his boyhood. This boy was Geralt of Rivia. Many witchers became infuriated while they summoned their search party. Young Geralt hid behind the protection of the trees as he watched the men on horseback. Geralt in his youth was an excellently skilled archer before he became familiar with the ways of the blade. Although he would be known as a master swordsman, Geralt's first most natural instinct to survive was with the ways of the bow. He sat in wait above the Hexers, looking down from the highlands of the hills he was familiar with, much more than these bastards. Fortunately, there was another posse who stood for the good of the Witchers. They came to administer justice for the evil deeds of those who became influenced by the Count and his sinister agenda. A man held responsible was watched in his swift trial by the eyes of young Geralt, and his young sharp ears heard the sentencing without missing a word. You raised your sword against the people. Young Geralt looked astonished at what was happening before him. He was confused as to what this trial was exactly. All that young Geralt understood was that he saw something terrible just before all this came about. The man spoke on, as young Geralt of Rivia had given his attention in such a way that he had lost himself in the moment, becoming as one of the trees he hid behind, still stuck in that moment, although this time had passed. Young Geralt was traumatized beyond comprehension. Geralt was rooted as one of those trees at that moment, but only for a time. This was the beginning of Geralt's callousing numbness into becoming a man early, but he didn't realize that he was becoming more than a man, and more than just a Hexer. Geralt's toughness started in these moments of this bizarre trial would exceed any Hexer before him. As the man carrying out the trial's sentence spoke on, "These are proofs." The man carrying out judgment of the murders looked towards young Geralt, while he looked back at the murderer in scorn. "You are cursed 100 times." Young Geralt of Rivia turned his eyes from the man to the other as he spoke, that shaven, bald elder. "Out! Surrender swords!" The elder pitifully gave his look with expression of pure grief. The men threw down their swords, yet were not executed as young Geralt expected the trial to go. Instead, the sentenced leader gave a seriously hard look and spoke at Geralt with his sternly pointed finger, rattling the chainmail he wore over his chest. "I'll remember you and get at you," the man who carried out the mutation said. This morphed Witcher Count took small steps forward as to incite intimidation, while his men looked back in hatred from their strong sense of betrayal, as they were convinced they were doing the right thing, as they believed they were following their leader's righteous orders for the greater good of all. This in truth was not the case. These men, who were faithful followers of the one who spoke, who came to Geralt's home to take him away, was a master of trickery through his deception as a shape-shifting count. How unfortunate for all who knew him, because none of them really knew him at all. Soon as that evil chameleon of a man turned around, young Geralt repeated the sentiment with conviction as the burning fire he had seen times 1,000 burning fires. "I'll remember, and I'll get at you." Young Geralt only understood one thing. He knew this man did much evil. He did not care what they did to him, performing the ritual reserved for grown men. Yes, he understood that it was beyond evil, and that the banished men had done him wrong by doing the mutation hexation ritual against his will. This, however, was not what bothered him, even in the slightest of degree. The reason why Geralt was bothered was that the pain of what he knew this man did to his family, along with his people, had turned into an unquenchable fire within his heart that could only be quenched by the blood of this man who led the others to follow him into the land of peace, which was Geralt's beloved Rivia. Little Geralt's hair was turning white, not just because of the ritual hexation. The whiteness of Geralt's hair came in strongly before his time of growing old, because of the pain that turned into absolute scorn. This feeling was purely righteous hatred for evil that burned hotter than the fires of the underworld. The Count in disguise took note in his warped mind, and didn't take this lightly, as he knew Geralt would die 1,000 times, just to come back stronger with burning passion, like the phoenix that rises from the ashes of defeat. Geralt would be the Count's bane of existence, as it was always meant to be since the day of his birth. This was his destiny, the destiny of the Witcher. Strength embodied forever, only to grow stronger. Love for good, to fight evil, would forever remain the foundation of his source of strength. deep within his heart as it burned within that longing for everlasting love, as the need could not be quenched until he would find the one who would fulfill the longing in his broken heart that was strengthened by these most primal desires. Young Geralt looked up at the good elder man who comforted him with pats on his head and strokes of his newly graying hair. Many strong men came from surrounding villages that were thriving much more and much stronger than the meager, peaceful land of Rivia. These men gathered shoulder to shoulder in a militantly formed stance about 10 feet apart to send these betrayers off to their banishment in the wilderness. Grief outweighed disdain in their hearts, as the pain made their hearts heavy with deep sorrow for the ones lost. Not a person remained untouched by the terrible, senseless tragedy that the Count had orchestrated to cause discord by utter destruction, weakening what he needed to fulfill his sickening plan that would take much time to be carried out by generational deception. This was the way of the dragon snake that was the Count, disguised as the leader of the Hexers. No one knew, as the men stood in front of the gates and beyond their towns, as the hot sun that day came beating down unmercifully upon their brows. Sweat stung all the more in their grieveful, sorrow-stricken eyes, as if they were not exhausted enough from absorbing the weaker one's suffering of loss, bearing the burden. The Witcher boys grew, who were taken along with Geralt, and they were christened in the benighting into manhood, granted the full power of the Witcher, with their sigil medallions on chains about their necks. Their swords were given to them once each had been touched shoulder and shoulder with their blades. All was complete. Geralt had been moved from the bow of the hunter to the sword of the warrior Witcher. He was the most powerful wolf of the pack naturally, as no one could deny the fact, and all that had mentally driven him since that fateful day. Not to take away from his fellow brethren, since they in their own right had this very same burning passion as well, to fight the very same evil that invaded with senseless chaos that took peace from their broken hearts. These young men grew to have hearts of golden stone, good gold hearts that were made like stone by the darkness of evil deeds they endured. There was a different kind of atmosphere in those times from the life stages due to the configuration of orbital paths caused by the conjunction of the spheres. This dense moisture from the dew of the heavens beyond the chaos protected for a time the ongoing rifts that came from the outer realms with no laws of flesh. The woods, the mountains, and the wilderness were still possessing a certain innocence that still remained free of the cosmic evil in those times, free of any defilement from the more monstrous beasts that came from beyond the stars above the unsuspecting mankind. These old Hexers were well aware of monsters. Only in these times of Geralt's youth, the golden age of the fight, was ignorant of many secrets that were yet to come. For evil never shows its true face, same as gods who present themselves to mankind. So men were no longer outnumbered by elves. Dwarves, yes, but they mostly moved underground, so it did not seem this way above, on land under the sun. These men were lost when it comes to much of the history they chose to forget. Many were like sitting ducks, waiting to be devoured by monsters and didn't even know what was coming for them, same as they were oblivious as to what their ancestors did to drive the dwarf people underground, becoming strong out of necessity, facing evil down there that would make the men of this time soil their pants. Elves were not to be talked about because of the tragedies of many families' history, so the general people were ignorant of their not-so-distant past history. Tents were set up without much care for invaders, let alone actual monsters. But there was a sweeping coming soon after Geralt's youth, coming into his manhood in these days. There was a queen and a princess in this time, and they were educated. Her people were gathered in the forest, and this queen had a falcon hawk she loved, whom she and her royal subjects took great care forthwith. This queen lended her ear for a moment to listen to the princess, as she came to her, interrupting the playtime with her beloved bird. "Mother!" The princess looked with great concern as she spoke to the queen in her time of joy, while the large happy bird flew away singing, making the queen smile contently. Immediately the queen called for her horse, almost shouting, "My horse!" She, the queen of the forests, left in such a rush without saying another word for her daughter that the princess knew her mother sensed her words before she could say them. The queen of the forests was a clairvoyant of sorts when she was near or far to her beloved daughter. The princess of the forests could only stand and watch the horse gallop away as her mother leaned forward in haste. The queen would not let it be known that she knew what the urgency was, as she played dumb with her daughter, who decided to chase her down with her horse. "Mother!" The princess pitifully cried out close behind, as to make her horse's trotting come to a halt. "Not now! Don't spoil my fun," her mother said, as to not look back, for this would mean tearful eye contact. Instead, the queen of the forest picked back up with the trotting of her steed, forcing her daughter to follow, ever so curiously. The queen had to think things through very carefully, as to protect her daughter, the princess, as best she could, so she slowed down to keep the suspicion down to the minimalist degree. She knew how to present herself quite well, being a respected and well-rounded queen, when it comes to being versatile in diverse social situations. "Pavetta!" the queen shouted, as the princess's horse suddenly ran faster ahead of her mother. This rash decision caused harm to the princess, as the inexperienced girl caused her horse to jolt too quickly and much too hard by her signal to go faster. She flew off the saddle like a fallen leaf in an autumn wind. Sleep came over the princess, instantly in unconsciousness, as she lay in the leaves of the forest bed floor. "Pavetta!" The queen ran to her daughter after jumping off her horse, looking down in concerned, guilty expression as she knelt. "Pavetta!" The queen of the forest rolled her daughter over on her back, as her cheek was pressed into the ground like a sleeping angel. The princess scared her mother for a good minute, and woke to rise with the help of her mother's arms gently raising her up to sit. Pavetta looked confused as she sat up. She rose from the ground with her mother, and they both became bewildered together from the strange distant whistling sound through the wind. They were both sensitive to the vibrational energy that was around them in every moment, so this feeling was strong enough to make them aware that something different was there. Anticipation kept them highly alert in all directions as they stood still like hunted prey. The whistling didn't stop until what was coming for them came. The earth began to rise up like an uprooted tree, and the queen of the forest drew herself near to her beloved daughter. The princess of the forest seemed to have no fear. The fall off her steed gave the princess an unusual calm, and she looked closely into her mother's eyes. The queen looked visibly frightened, yet comforted in the calmness of her daughter. She embraced her delicately with her chin next to her daughter's shoulder. When something came up from the ground disheveled, the princess of the forest then jumped back with a gasping breath. Together the queen of the forest and her beloved daughter took a leaping backward step. Yet the dishevelment of the ground from these hidden, quickly moving things were all around and under them. There was no escaping whatever this strange attack was, and they knew it just as it seemed there was no hope. The old dirt that covered whatever these creatures were hid their hideous appearance during these first quick moments. The bursting of these monsters' enormous force from the underground movement threw the lovely ladies on their asses. They hugged for a half second, only for their comforting embrace to be broken from sheer terror as the head of a monster revealed itself. This long neck like a serpent, but with head like a dragon, came roaring right straight at them to induce fear before the kill. This monster was coming in to feast quickly upon their sweet flesh, so vulnerable to the freakish thing. The monster had set its sight on its meat to satisfy its dormant appetite during the period of time it had hibernated for brooding its offspring in the rot and decay below the hollowed places under the actual tree roots. This monster had such an evil intellect that it knew instinctively to find the place under the trees, whereas to mimic the half-uprooted parts. Surely the thing knew it would be disturbed one day by an unsuspecting victim who would be bewildered enough to be caught off guard. The eyes of the monster looked like it knew satisfaction of blood and meat craving was to be quenched to its hateful desire. The monster reared its head back in motion to come down quickly upon the feast of flesh before its jaws became open. Once the vile serpent bared its teeth, the fangs proved eager to bite and chew. The thing's long esophagus was visibly making the motions of forcing the imagined pieces down its throat, and terror increased in the noble women as they felt helpless for that frightful moment, which before Geralt jumped between them and the monster, it seemed that the dreadful moment would indeed last forever, while the creature taunted the defenseless women. Geralt jumped from out of nowhere exactly in the moment when and where he needed to, saving the blessed royalty of the sacred land. The monster that had such incredibly advanced animal instincts was outmatched for the senses of the Witcher. Geralt of Rivia was the supreme Hexer. There was no stopping him when the senses of the beast took over, and the blackness boiled in his veins. As this happened, when his senses to destroy evil kicked in, the goodness of his heart counteracted the purely darkened evil magic that coursed through his mutated blood. This chemical reaction of sorts was a special kind of magic that manipulated the laws of nature through ancient science, which was beyond the ways of any alchemy of the times and ages. This conundrum within his new existence was both a gift and a life sentence that was going to feel like nothing but a curse at times for Geralt of Rivia's unending life. With one motion to succor in this eager beast, Geralt's strong blade came with an even stronger swing in the counterflow back down. Such intense fury came with his attack. It was more frightening than the monster itself, once it was realized the ferocity that Geralt wielded in his hands. Focus was shown on his brow, and skill was natural, as could easily be recognized with the precision displayed by the white wolf. The neck of the strange beast was protected by scales of unusual strength, so a slacking, cutting swipe would not instantly kill. So Geralt, like a king, stabbed with all his might a great thrust into the gulping neck of this evil serpentine fuck from hell. The skin was so strong that Geralt had to use great force to pull his strong sword free from the fatal puncture. Gratification only came over him for that split second of a moment when he realized his instincts served him well to destroy evil. He was not gratified that he saved these noble women. He did not find gratification because he knew instantly by that very same instinct which brought him there, he would now be tied to these souls, to protect the queen and princess of the forest in their time of need, which was now and forevermore so long as they lived. This sense of his true new meaning had befallen his conscience, overtaking his thought process and undertaking his actions through this very same lone instinct. The prophecy of the white wolf had been fulfilled, to be carried out from this day until many days would pass, that there would be new evils for a different time, in a different world. Much change would come through countless years that had to happen before then, and this was only the beginning of the many countless tales and accounts of the legendary white wolf that is embodied in Geralt of Rivia. The land of Rivia lived in his heart now, so the destroyed place of his youth was a state of mind for him, and nothing less. His source of strength through righteous vengeance against hateful beasts and men, repaid through his blade. The hatred for evil fueled him, making him stronger with each passing day. The kindness in Geralt's heart outweighed this complex equation, however, albeit the poisoning that brought forth this incantation through his blood mutation would be a constant fight within his own spirit soul. The innocence that was taken from Geralt's heart as an abducted child grew into a blessing which formed his strength as that mightiness surpassed all others. These were the requirements for the ultimate spell to make the strongest witcher. These secrets never were to be revealed to him, because the knowledge was forbidden, and those sorcerers who passed down the knowledge sacrificed their lives to pass down the forbidden secrets of the destroyed wizards of old. A child betrayed by his own family, his own father. His father was forced to do this evil thing with the Count, who was in disguise during the times around Geralt's birth. Geralt only knew his father as a man who kept to himself, never sharing any details to anyone. Things made sense to him once he got older, when realization set in after the many years of contemplation. Geralt thought to himself, for all those years, growing into the young man he became, meditating on the many possibilities that led to his reality of his life and adulthood. The only thing he could think, after using the process of elimination and applying this simple rule of logic, was that his father was manipulated. Geralt thought his poor father must have been manipulated in such a way that the guilt of his forced decision to sell his son was always weighing him down into his daily silence. Hindsight proved to be clear compared to the ignorant bliss of his innocent youth, before he was taken by force into the Witcher's possession. Geralt wanted to hold on to his memories of happy, simple, and peaceful times in Rivia, when there were no worries. He liked to stay in his mind, where he stored these precious moments working with his father in their humble farm, tending to their animals, and helping his mom gather fruits and vegetables. Geralt used to hunt with his father, and he taught him how to master the bow, with precision aim to hit targets without fail. His mother taught him patience with the laws of time, so that he would not rush to hurry and folly. He remembered things that stuck with him, that she told him, like when he gathered the vegetables and fruits by her side in their garden. She told him many times, "My Geralt, it might seem that nothing is happening with these carrots in the ground, and the beans you want to take right now. It seems that the raspberries you love so much will never come to make your favorite jam." He always replied, "Yes, mother." Then she would smile and tell him the phrase that stuck with him: "The fruits of labor come from the care you give." In the land of Rivia, Geralt's mother would elaborate to him at times in different ways on this lovely sentiment, saying things like, "The vegetables and fruits of our hard work with our hands needs to be given as much care as you want for yourself. Give love to the ground and the precious soil of our land that is their home. Rivia is a special place where we can find all the kinds of foods that anyone could want. So we must take great care, not just for us, as to give thanks for the blessings that not everyone is able to have, like our distant neighbors who struggle to feed their families. You remember the people who come begging sometimes to your father, making deals, pleading. The ground we plant the seed in is the plant's shelter, and we tuck them in each night as they go to sleep, just as I do to you. We give them water, the same as we need to live. So remember, my Geralt, we must take care of each other, our food source, and our neighbors, with as much care as we know that we need for our own selves. If you remember this simple way of life, you will have a good long life." Geralt repeated these things he learned from his mother to himself each and every day and night of his life, keeping him strong in the man he continued to grow to be. No matter the beast inside him as the witcher he had become, there was this deeply rooted kindness in him that allowed him to be a man, instead of being overtaken by brute savagery of the witcher he had become. The one thing Geralt of Rivia learned from his quiet father was of the hunt. "The hunt is long, my son. Even when the day brings meat quickly from a quick kill, the hunt never ends. We must always look and think ahead for our meat, or we will die in starvation, not strong enough to continue the long hunt." And Geralt knew this applied to him now more than ever. The long hunt would be his life. Geralt of Rivia would forever be on the long hunt to exterminate these monsters that have come into his world, taking away his homeland and all that he knew to be home. In these early days of Geralt's life, there was much more to come that would give him knowledge of the mysteries of these strange beasts, as well as the mysteries of the many deceptions that people like the Count would intricately woven throughout many spells of deceit. All the magic in the world couldn't keep Geralt of Rivia from completing his eternal task.